Hi everyone, I'm meteorologist Jacob Wycoff here with Terry Eliasen, our executive weather producer. Hopefully you're not outside melting.
No, and we're in the nice, cool studio, thankfully. But welcome to our Jacob and Terry little stream webcast here, updating you on what is day 2 of our first heat wave in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's been a while. We didn't have one last year. We only had 5 90-degree days last year. And if I could just really quickly recap last year, not too often.
Do we really want to?
I mean, bring up a good point there. Yeah. Last year, incredibly wet. Usually when we have wet years, we don't have hot years.
Right.
But we actually had a hot year. It wasn't extreme heat, 90s and higher. It was just a consistent warm
It was warmer
spell.
than average.
Yep.
Even without the 90-degree days, it was still a warmer than average year and summer. But really, the story last year, we don't have to bring it up. It was all the rain, all the weekend washouts. So I'm curious. I'm assuming that most folks would take a hot, humid summer over a rainy summer?
Probably. I think. Still able to spend time outdoors when it's hot and humid. It's just not rainy.
Right, and I do think, and I know this is jumping ahead a little bit, but obviously we're in day 2 of our current heat wave. I do think, and we've been saying this for a while, that this summer is going to be particularly hot, and you know, with La Nina coming on and multitude of factors, I think this is not, in other words, this isn't a flash in the pan what we're doing right now. It's probably going to keep sort of coming back over the next couple of months.
Absolutely. So if you're joining us on CBS News Boston and you want to participate, you can join us on YouTube. We're on Facebook Live as well. We'll be trying to take some questions throughout this broadcast. We stay on usually 15 or 20 minutes or so. We're going to break down what we're seeing. We'll take some viewer questions. We'll recap it at the end. We'll have some fun.
Yep, tie it up in a bow.
Absolutely.
So yeah, why don't we just go through where we are right now and where we're headed today and tomorrow as far as high temperatures.
Perfect. So right now, if we want to pull up the weather graphics, we're sitting in the mid-80s in Boston, middle 80s in Worcester. Notice Fitchburg, Nashua, they're already knocking on the doorstep of 90 degrees. The dangerous part of this, it's not just the heat, but it's also the humidity. This is pretty gross outside, which is a scientific term. It's gross.
Yeah, that's highly scientific. But anything 70 plus just feels excessively humid and swampy. The highest that we usually ever get around here is like 74, 75, and you can see there's actually 74 out in Western Mass.
Yeah, that's Bennington, Vermont.
Oh, okay, 73 down in Norwood. So we're getting to be about as humid as it gets, and I think actually tomorrow will be a touch above these readings.
Yeah, warmer air temperature and also muggier.
More humid, yes.
Yeah, so it's going to be really, and this is, we don't want to overblow things, but it is dangerous outside for people that are susceptible to the heat. If you're working out in the heat for an extended period of time, our elderly neighbors, unhoused, they got to take it easy. And
you got to stay hydrated. This is the type of weather where if you're out, you know, working in construction or whatever, for whatever reason you're outside for several hours, it's important that you seek as much shade as you can, stay as hydrated as you can, and just try to stay cool as best you can.
Absolutely. This is what we're forecasting for this afternoon. We're talking mid-90s for both Boston and Worcester. There is the Merrimack Valley, southern New Hampshire. You get that downsloping off sort of the Worcester Hills, some of the higher elevations, and the White Mountains. That area tends to warm up with a southwesterly wind, like we will see today and tomorrow. They're gonna be close to triple digits, probably falling maybe a degree or two short, but Nashua at 97, this is the air temperature.
Yeah. I bet you a couple towns in the Merrimack Valley, either today or tomorrow, will probably nick 100. And a lot of folks, even in the newsroom, are saying, you know, why in particular is it the Merrimack Valley where we think it's going to be hottest? Like, and it seems like in the wintertime, that's the spot where we get the most snow a lot of times, where the banding ends up happening. And this is the exact opposite. And again, like you said, it's that downsloping. So the winds, they're in a southwesterly direction, so they come up off the Worcester Hills. And then that downsloping, when air sinks, which it tends to do after it comes off those hills, it sinks, it warms, and you get a couple degrees warmer coming off of the Worcester Hills, and so that's what happens there.
Yeah, and we do have heat advisories up for most of the area. There is an excessive heat warning up for southern New Hampshire. Part of this is also the I guess climatology of things too, right? For New Hampshire to get heat indices that are 105, 107, it's a little more rare than
Correct.
us getting it. And their bodies maybe aren't as acclimated. I mean, I'm not acclimated. I've lived here for quite a long time. It's going to hurt me. It could potentially be more dangerous as you go up to the north.
Yeah, I think what it is the thresholds are just a little bit different in different states. So the National Weather Service, down in Taunton, or now in our local National Weather Service office that controls Massachusetts is different than the one that controls New Hampshire, and so their thresholds are a little bit different. I live a few miles from the Mass-New Hampshire border, and I can say that folks up that way we're pretty much the same here in Mass as they are in Southern New Hampshire.
Right.
We're talking about a degree or two difference. So really, this is sort of semantics. It's got to be
playing
hot.
the same game.
It's got to be hot and humid everywhere. Just because you're not in the excessive heat warning and you're in the advisory, it really doesn't make much difference. It's going to be hot. It's going to be humid, and you want to limit your time outside.
All right, so this is what our heat indices will be as we go. I'll kind of run through this a little bit slower. You're talking triple digits to 105. That's dangerous. That's, as Terry mentioned, limit your time outdoors. Then we really don't get much relief overnight with the heat and humidity. I shouldn't say heat overnight, but warmness doesn't cool down effectively overnight. So it's not great sleeping weather. And then, we're back to, let's say, Boston, 100, 103, something like that, as you go into tomorrow afternoon. Again, really kind of dangerous stuff.
Yeah, and I think the one difference, I just sent out a new blog, I think the one difference tomorrow between today, again, the slightly warmer temperature, slightly more humidity, but there's a thunderstorm threat in the afternoon. So that's something in addition that we'll be watching tomorrow, in addition to the heat. What's going to happen is there's a cool front that's going to be sagging down. Most of the time you think of a cold front and it comes west to east. Well, this time it's going to come more northeast to southwest across the area. So tomorrow afternoon, primarily we'll be watching like Maine, New Hampshire, Essex County, northern Middlesex County for the chance of any sort of severe weather. Severe thunderstorms tomorrow could include very heavy downpours. Obviously, the atmosphere is juiced up.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of wind damage. But again, the primary area for that tomorrow, southern New Hampshire, northern Mass, that would be late afternoon, anytime after 3 or 4 o'clock.
I am going to continue to try to reconnect to my graphics. But while we do that, Terry, you, at the beginning, at the top, we had said kind of how rare this air is. It's been a little while since we have seen a heat wave. It's now kind of the warmest June stretch that we've had in a few years. Do you think that surprises people that this right here could be the warmest stretch in 3 years?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's been a couple of years since we've had a heat wave, mainly due again to all the rain we had last year. But in my mind, this is not all that unusual. I mean, a 3 or 4 day June heat wave is not unusual. I think we've had something like 30 or 35 in our history, which goes back about 150 years. We've had about 30 or 35 actual heat waves in Boston in June. So once every 3 or 4 years it happens. So not all that unusual. What we were wondering is just how high the temperatures would be. Obviously, if you've got a couple days that are near 100, well, that's a bit unusual. We've only hit 100 degrees once before in June, and that was back 2 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah, it was the end of the month. It was in 2022.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. And then we hit, I think it was 98, 99, and 100 consecutive days.
That was unusual, right? So if we were to hit 100 in Boston, obviously that would be fairly unusual. But a 3 day, 4 day heat wave in June is really not all that unusual. It's been a little while since we've had something like that.
Absolutely. We are reconnecting right now. You see a live look outside. It's muggy. You feel it. It's the type of morning. I got up a little earlier than you, but when you stepped out the door, how did it feel when you were coming out?
Yeah, you would just feel it immediately. It just feels soppy. It feels like a little like pea soup.
Yep.
It feels like you're just you can feel the air, which in my mind is never a good thing.
Right.
This is supposed to be Florida, not Massachusetts. They were joking that the Celtics went down to Miami to celebrate their victory, and that they went down there to escape the heat from the Boston Heat down to Miami. But I'm sure it's probably still pretty warm and humid down there.
I would imagine so.
But just to get back to the thunderstorm threat, so that cold front, and we'll pull it up for you in a second here, that cold front will very slowly move down here Thursday night and early Friday. So I know a lot of folks are thinking about attending the parade on Friday, 11 a.m., the Celtics parade. Right now, it looks like the front will probably have passed through Boston by 11 a.m. on Friday, which would mean we may start off, say, 7, 8 in the morning in Boston. It could be mid-80s and humid. by 11 o'clock or noon, we should be cooling off lower 80s, maybe even the 70s in the afternoon. So kind of an upside down day on Friday. You start with more hot, and you end the day a little bit cooler with that front coming through.
I do have the graphics up. Yeah, there we go. So there's the front that you mentioned for tomorrow, Terry. There's our thunderstorms.
Yeah, up in northern Mass, southern Hampshire.
And then as we go into Friday, Terry, if you want to go ahead and narrate this.
Yeah, so that you can see that cold front is just bisecting the area, and that's now, of course, by 5 p.m. you see. This is not, by the way, this is one model. This is not precise or exact, but the idea is that cold front slowly moves north to south on Friday, and the thunderstorms will be popping up, along it and, on either side of it. So that's what makes the parade forecast that much more difficult. Will the front come through? We think it will probably pass through, but will there be a shower thunderstorm? Between 11 a.m. and 1:30, you look at this particular model and it's awfully close. A lot of the thunderstorm development is favored just west of Boston, but a little too close for comfort if you've got 1 million people on the streets of Boston.
Right, absolutely. I mentioned it this morning on the morning show. It's almost trading one evil for another, right? Do you want 1 million people to deal with the heat or 1 million people to deal with the thunderstorms? I don't know the right answer. I just forecast the weather. I don't have the right answer. But it is something certainly we're watching for. For the heat wave, yesterday was our first 90-degree reading of the season. It took a little while to get to that point. Granted, Boston Logan,
a little bit different.
At the ocean, right off the harbor there, influenced heavily by the water any season. Other places inland have had their first 90. Boston's usually a little bit later.
Our climate set is very unique here in Boston. In my mind, the best spot for our official climate record would be somewhere downtown, Common. And it used to be, back in the 1930s, used to be in Post Office Square. For whatever reason, they decided to move the official ASOS, which is the National Weather Service equipment, basically out on the runway at Logan, which, as you know, it's basically in the middle of the ocean. So any sort of little puff of wind in any direction, from the east, and your temperatures are going to be much different.
Right.
So Boston is always a tricky forecast, and it's not downtown Boston. We're trying, we're forecasting for Logan Airport, and as far as the heat wave goes. And yesterday all day long, Eric and I are looking. It's 90 to 95 everywhere, and Boston's sitting at 84, 85, and then eventually, I think it was either 4 or 5 o'clock. The winds shifted from southeast, southwest, and we puffed up to 92 degrees.
And we're already. You said it was like 84. We're now sitting at 86. And it's 11 o'clock. It's very likely that we get there.
Today.
Now, if we go back to the records, let me pull that up. This is, stand by. The records, we're going to be in the neighborhood of some records, possibly falling just short.
Yeah, Boston's records are fairly high this week, especially for June. I want to say today was 96, tomorrow's 98. I'm sure you'll bring it up in a second. So close, perhaps. Like you said, probably a degree or two short. There you go. So yesterday the record was 94. We hit 92, and our forecast is basically to fall a couple degrees short each day of the records. But not to say that we couldn't nick it. We couldn't get there.
And just because we're not in record territory, we're in the neighborhood, and it's still dangerous. In fact, the air temperature is not what you feel as you head out the door.
And interesting to note, the records for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday were set back at 1920s, and then, of course, on Thursday, 1953, which this day and age, it seems like most of the records were set in more modern time. Almost every high temperature record, typically nowadays, you see somewhere between like 1998 and 2023.
That's 25, 30
That's 25 years. So these records are unusually old. They're for the taking, but again, we're forecasting a few degrees shy.
So this is I want to show the forecast map for Thursday. For Friday, rather. This is where we see some of that relief coming in.
Yeah, but again, it's going to be progressively better as the day goes on. So you wake up in the morning, it could be, so that 85 degree in Boston, that's a morning temperature. By 1 in the afternoon, it could be 76, 78. And you can see we have hotter temperatures in like Southbridge, Worcester, Pawtucket, because the front's going to take longer to get there. Again, imagine that front coming basically north to south, or northeast to southwest across the region. So down in like, say, Hartford, Connecticut, or anywhere in Connecticut, they're going to be well into the 90s on on Friday because the front just won't get there yet. Whereas Southern New Hampshire, Essex County may not get out of the upper 70s, low 80s because the front's going to have passed through there much quicker.
Do have a couple of comments on Facebook. Terry, if you want to pull up YouTube and just check it out. Valerie says, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Oh, boy.
Valerie, four-letter word. Literally four-letter word. But, yeah, I guess tomorrow, we're 6 months away from winter starting.
Oh, boy. Come on now.
I can't do that?
I mean, you can do it. I don't know. I am the longer you live here, you got to just, I'm trying to learn to enjoy each season for what it is.
Yep.
And you're in the middle of summer and you're like, oh man, this is brutal. And then you're in the middle of winter and you're wishing for days like this.
Absolutely. So. I think I tell kids this when I do school visits, that we're really lucky to live in such a geographically and meteorologically diverse area where we get 4 distinct seasons. We can be in the mountains and the ocean within a day. We're really lucky to see that.
And by the way, you can take a short hour or 2 drive if you want to cool off. The Cape is in the going to be, I don't know what it is right now. It's probably in the 70s. So
I'll pull up the current temperature.
Because the ocean temperatures are still 60, 65 down there. You can see the Cape current temperature is 77, 78. So not too far off if you want the relief.
Yeah, and they have that nice onshore wind. It's going to be nice and breezy there.
Nantucket looks lovely, 71 degrees.
Yeah, hop on that ferry. Let's pull up the forecast for the Cape and Islands over the next couple of days. Really, the heat wave will likely break on Friday, barring any sort of changes, slowing down of the front. But Thursday looks like a pretty nice day, too, if you want to head to the beaches. I mentioned it a couple of times, but museums. I'm a big fan of the Museum of Science and the Children's Museum, but, the art museums are always great, the libraries. Find a place to stay cool, and I mean, it's summer. Kids still got to get their learn on,
Yeah, I mean, so just driving by, we have right down here on Soldiersfield Road, this splash park has been popping the last couple of days. So I think a lot of those places, there are so many great places to go to beat the heat. If you're unfortunately, if you don't have air conditioning at home, the city has provided several outlets, several places to go to.
Yeah.
Now today may be a little bit different with the holiday. There may be, this is actually a subject of our morning meeting this morning, is what places are open, what are closed, but. There are certainly places you can go to beat the heat. Unfortunately, a lot of our ponds, even some of the beaches are closed due to some bacteria. So it's a complicated, it's a bit complicated, but you can go on our website and find some of those spots where you can go.
Yeah, call ahead if you have any questions too. Did get a comment from Alan and a response from Mike. Alan said, "Come on, it's summer, deal with it."
Okay.
Which. I hear you. It is summer. We get hot temperatures, but to give a comment back, Mike says to all the folks that say it's summer, you do know the average summer temperature in this area is 80 to 85 degrees. Right now it's 77, 78 degrees.
Average, yeah.
So we're well above that. We're 15, 20 degrees
Today
above that.
Today is a 20-degree day above average.
Yeah.
And again, it happens. Again, like we said, it's not unusual to have a heat wave in June, to be in the 90s in June, but it is when you've got 3 or 4 straight days of this stuff and without much cooling off at night with high humidity. Again, some folks are not as fortunate as others to have the means to cool off and to stay cool. So
absolutely. And we all have different health things going on, elderly neighbors, that sort of thing.
Now, this probably goes without saying, but obviously the car heats up very quickly. You had an experiment. I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
Back a couple of years ago. Just briefly talk about that.
Yeah. So where I had been living at that time, basically we had a few hot car deaths over a span of 3 or 4 days, and it really broke my heart. I wasn't a father at that time, but it really tore at me. So I basically sat in a car, had a doctor outside to show the impacts on the human body, what I went through, and I documented it. I had a couple of GoPros. Over that time, I think that my heart rate started. I don't know, resting heart rate was around 50. By the time I exited the car 30 minutes later, it was like 125. My blood pressure skyrocketed. I was drenched in sweat.
Just from 30 minutes?
Just from 30 minutes.
And it was a 90-degree day.
And it was a 90-degree day, and the temperatures in the car went from like 85 to 125 in those 30 minutes. And it's sort of a logarithmic. It rises quickly. I obviously could open the door and exit at any point. Kids...
Or pets
aren't able to.
Right.
And so that's really why I wanted to bring awareness to it. I am convinced that I may have some long-term health issues from that, for real.
No kid, really?
Yeah, I've had, ever since that point, I've had memory issues.
You are getting older as well.
Well, that too, yeah, you see it in the gray. But I will say that, and I did this experiment, I put it out on social media. Other people that have done it have contacted me and said, hey, you starting
Really?
to, yeah. So I don't know, I mean, maybe I fried my brain, literally fried my brain.
Wow, okay.
So I would not recommend that. You know, you at home, we're big social media people. I did it with a doctor outside. If I had checked prior to, probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that we absolutely have to watch for. I use the phrase, beat the heat, check the back seat. Because that's, we get in our routines, we are busy, we're on our phones, and then we forget our kids buckled in. And unfortunately, it usually takes a really bad turn, a tragic turn.
And not to mention, you know, if you know your neighbors don't have air conditioning, especially if they're elderly, you know, just give a check on them, you know, or offer up some help if you can. Again, we're not saying this is like the craziest weather stretch ever, but it is 3 to 4 days of 90 plus, and you know, it can get, again, without the cooling off at night. You know, it can get really brutal.
I think you put together this graphic, is the record minimums. We're going to be in that sort of territory too. Let me see.
Yeah, so the low temperatures so the low temperatures typically fall to somewhere around the dew point readings. And when the dew points are this high, our low temperatures, as you can see the forecast for the next few days, in the 70s for lows. And these are again, as low as it gets, and that's typically early morning. Again, probably no record set, but nonetheless, pretty gross sleeping weather.
Yeah, horrible stuff. I actually, on this same note, I did a research and story on when it comes to nighttime temperatures and uncomfortable sleeping weather. It causes an increase in mental health episodes. So when you have these extended periods of uncomfortable weather and people aren't sleeping well, I mean, it goes without saying, right? If we don't sleep enough, we start to get
there are enough reasons why we're not sleeping enough,
right?
And you add the weather in and it's I don't doubt that at all.
So that was a very interesting story, and it was actually, the reason it came up is there's a big need for, just in general, mental health professionals, but then climate change on top of that increases that need even more.
So you bring up climate change, and I've had a few of these questions over the last few days. Like, you know, can we attribute what's going on now to climate change? And we probably need a whole another half an hour to cover that discussion. But, you know, typically what I say is, you know, it's hard to pin one storm or one heat wave or one record-setting day on, you know, global climate change. What probably would be more relevant is if this continued throughout the summer, and we're seeing record-breaking number of 90-degree days or record-breaking high levels of humidity over the course of weeks and months. You know, then we could probably make more of a connection. But you know, a 3-day heat wave in June, again, not completely unusual.
Absolutely. I'm going to pull up just showing how many 90-degree days we've had over the last few years. I think last year sort of an anomaly.
Very much so. Again, with all the rain, I think we had there it is, it's coming up now, 5 90-degree days last year.
And it was still a warm year.
And it was.
It was still a top 10 warm year.
Yep.
So I guess it just speaks to the consistency of maybe not hot, but just warm temperatures we had. Meanwhile, 21 and 22, we had 20 plus.
Those are some hot summers.
Yeah, I think globally 22, or was 23 the hottest year on record?
I feel like
last year?
It was, yes. Yeah. Correct. And 24 is on pace to
even beat that. Yeah.
It's funny, like we show these numbers, and if folks are watching from, say, maybe they're transplants from Texas or somewhere in the Southwest, they're like, 21, 24 90-degree days, that's like a typical month for us. But again, here in Boston, I want to say we average close to 16 or 17 total 90-degree days each year. So we have had some pretty rough years just in the last few.
Absolutely. Do you want to check YouTube real quick?
Yeah, YouTube, I've not seen, no
questions. No comments, okay. No worries on that. Let me just, before we go, we'll pull up the 7-day forecast. We'll continue to watch this over the next couple of days, and we'll have your Patriots, not Patriots. I was parade and sports.
Parades usually involve Patriots.
That's
but,
true.
Once in a while, the other teams get.
The Celtics parade forecast. We'll watch to see how that plays out. Here's your full 7-day forecast. Mid to upper 90s the next couple of days when you factor in the humidity.
Hey, by the way, summer officially starts tomorrow.
Absolutely. That's what I said. 6
Summer
months
solstice.
from now.
Summer solstice.
It's winter solstice. Mid 80s for Friday, but that's again a changing forecast depending on the time of the day. Very well could be upper 80s as we kind of get into the morning and then dropping into the afternoon, watching a thunderstorm threat. Saturday looks to be a fairly decent day overall, and then a late chance for rain heading into Sunday. And as Terry mentioned sort of off the top, this is a pattern that looks to kind of repeat itself. There are sort of more 90s down the pike that we'll get to. It may not be an extended stretch, but a few kind of peppered in. It looks like a warm stretch.
I think next week is going to be a warm week. It probably won't be as hot as this week was, but I think overall warmer than average week. We may sprinkle a 90 or 2 in there, and the pattern, again, once we get into these patterns, they tend to repeat. Much like last year, we had the repeating rain. I think this year maybe it'll be the repeating heat.